Hi, I'm Rebecca Brown. I'm the USA Director of Tobacco-Free Portfolios. Very excited to be here with PAVe and to discuss the end game conversation. One of the things that I think is important is, when we're talking about end game, is really fighting industry from all fronts. And one way in which we can affect change is through the capital markets. So at Tobacco-Free Portfolios, we encourage the finance sector to take a seat at the table when it comes to fighting big tobacco. So we're asking banks, asset managers, institutional investors, insurers, not to invest, lend, or insure tobacco companies. So Dr. Tedros from the WHO mentioned at the launch of the Tobacco-Free Finance Pledge, which is a good spirit initiative that now boasts over 200 global signatories. He said, tobacco-free portfolios is really the missing link between public health and the finance sector. So really bringing finance on board in the conversation when it comes to bringing an end to an industry that makes products that, intended use is incredibly dangerous. So that's what we do. Very excited to be talking about this topic, and I'm looking forward to, promoting future generations to having the best health possible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Rebecca for those introductory remarks. I'm going to now introduce our wonderful panelists for today. If you could all show your lovely faces. Our panelists for today include Chris Bostic, the Policy Director from Action on Smoking and Health, Stacy Gagosian, the Vice President of Public Policy with the Truth Initiative, and Mark Gottlieb, the Executive Director from the Public Health Advocacy Institute at Northeastern University. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Lovely. So I want to preface this discussion before we start with any questions by saying that when we are talking about a tobacco-free future or tobacco endgame, that we are referring to commercial tobacco products only that are manufactured by the tobacco industry. We are not discussing sacred tobacco use that is used by Native American communities. So just want to get that out of the way before we even start the discussion. So I want to start with Chris. For those of you who may not be familiar with this concept of a tobacco-free future or tobacco endgame, can you please provide us a little bit of an overview of what it is, what it entails, and what's the rationale behind it?
Sure. It's pretty simple. Tobacco-free future means basically we achieve what almost every tobacco control organization has as its vision, a world free from the death and disease from tobacco. And specifically for tobacco endgame, we've realized that you can't have that future if commercial tobacco products remain on the market. There's no way that we can have an end to the tobacco epidemic and a tobacco industry. It's oxymoronic, basically. And so the rationale is that we have banned other products that have done far less damage to public health in this country: asbestos, lead paint, lead gas. I'm not saying we shouldn't have banned those things, but tobacco is by far the #1 preventable death and disease causer in this country and around the world. We've even banned lawn darts in this country because 2 people were killed by them when they were misusing them 3 to 4 decades ago or whatever. So tobacco certainly needs to go, and it's something we should have done 50 years ago when we were absolutely certain it was killing people. But it's never too late. We need to get it done.
Exactly, yes. And so we're all here today. We started with the conversation with young people and how, vaping has affected their lives. We talked to parents and how it's impacted their relationship with their kids. And there is absolutely no good reason that tobacco should be on the market. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about here today. So like I said, we want to understand a little bit more of the nuance with tobacco endgame and a tobacco-free future. How would this impact parents and kids specifically? Because that's, of course, the audience that we have here today. How is this going to change their day-to-day, their everyday lives? And, for those young people who may already be addicted to tobacco products, or even adults, how would this impact them on the day-to-day?
Sure. Well, it's obviously going to impact everyone if these products are no longer available on the commercial market. And let me go back a bit and see, we've had T21 in this country for a few years. And before that, for decades, the minimum age was 18. And yet, nearly every adult smoker became addicted before they were 18. So my conclusion from that is that as long as this stuff is on the market, kids are going to get their hands on it and get addicted. So this is the final way we can end this epidemic, starting with when people actually start smoking. Anecdotally, we have heard from a number of people who do smoke, adults who smoke, who have asked us to do endgame in their community because they have tried to quit a dozen, 15 times and have not been able to. And they say it's because every store they walk into, their face is immediately met with tobacco products. And everyone that works on addiction knows the first thing you do is take the person away from the addictive product. But it's impossible to live in our society right now because tobacco products are sold in more places than milk.
That's very true. If you go into any bodega or store, and even unfortunately, some pharmacies are still selling these products, and that is completely unacceptable at this point in time, knowing what we know about tobacco products and how they impact health. So we know that there are some restrictions when it comes to regulating tobacco products at the federal level. And so as a result of that, ending the sale has to happen at the local and state level. Can you talk a little bit more about our famous word preemption? Some people may not be familiar with this word, but it's really important to understand how we are kind of restricted in terms of doing tobacco control in the United States. Can you explain a little bit more about preemption at the federal level?
Sure. The one-word answer is politics. It was in 2009 that Congress finally gave control or regulatory control to the Food and Drug Administration over tobacco products. It was the only consumer product that did not fall under their jurisdiction before that. But Congress also realized that if the FDA applied the same rubric to tobacco products as it does to everything else, they would have no choice but to ban it. And as we said, it's the most dangerous product on the market, or has ever been on the market. And so they wrote into the law that the FDA cannot ban the sale of tobacco products. However, they also wrote into the law that they were reserving that right for the states. And a lot of states then reserve that right for their local cities and counties and towns. It's going to vary by state. Not every state is going to be allowed. I live in Maryland. We have state level preemption, so we can't do end game at the local level. But California, who's ahead on this in this country, does not have preemption, and so they're working to build end game city by city and county by county. So that's basically why we have to do it at the local level, local and state level. We can't do it at the federal level.
Yeah, and that actually gives a really good segue into talking to Mark about his experience in Massachusetts. So like you said, certain states have to do it at the state level and some are allowing it to be done at the local level. We have a really great example to share about Brookline, Massachusetts. And Mark was instrumental in kind of being part of that whole process of a tobacco-free future there from start to finish. And they're still kind of wrapping things up, I guess you could say.
Not quite finished yet, right?
Yeah, exactly. Never quite finished when you're doing tobacco control work. But Mark, I want to ask you from a legal perspective and with your expertise being a lawyer and having the experience dealing with the case in Brookline, Massachusetts, what was that like? What was the story? How did it get started? And where are you now in Brookline?
Sure. Massachusetts is one of those states, as that Chris was mentioning, that has the ability at the local level to enact endgame and other measures to end the sale of tobacco products. So in Brookline, which had been a leader early on in eliminating smoking in workplaces, in raising the minimum sales age, some advocates there had thought, what can we do next to really protect the next generation from tobacco industry products, particularly vaping products, because that is where most of the young people today are getting addicted. And so they thought, well, maybe we can just end the sale completely and immediately by pulling the permits of all of the retailers that sell tobacco products. That did not seem like that would work politically. And so what we came up with is an idea that has been called tobacco-free generation, but I prefer to call it the nicotine-free generation, to make sure that vape products and e-cigarettes are included, which is basically a sales ban on all tobacco products, but it grandfathers in the existing users. So it sets a date, a birth date, after which time, if you were born after that date, you cannot be sold tobacco products. And so in Brookline, they chose, because of the timing of when they raised this, January 1, 2000. And so the town meeting, which is the legislative body of the town of Brookline, voted on a measure to not sell tobacco products to anyone born on or after January 1, 2000, and it passed. And this was the first place actually in the world to implement the nicotine-free or tobacco-free generation model. It was challenged by retailers in Brookline in litigation, but it's been implemented, and it's been working now for 2 years. We at the Public Health Advocacy Institute were fortunate enough to be able to work for the town of Brookline on their defense. We got the complaint dismissed, and they've appealed, and the highest court in Massachusetts is hearing that appeal on the 6th of November. And after that, I do think, fingers crossed, we will have a sales ban that admittedly is slowly phased in, but ultimately it will result in the end of all sales of tobacco products in one town, and just one town.
But that one town can set a precedent for many other towns. I have also heard of some rumblings of some other towns in Massachusetts that are also working on this concept. Can you share a little bit about what's going on right now with those other towns?
Sure. Just last week, 3 communities in Massachusetts, Stoneham, Wakefield, and Melrose, which are all suburbs of Boston, held hearings through their local health boards on this exact policy. And they collected evidence, they heard testimony, there was public comment. I think all 3 boards of health are reserving the vote until after the Brookline case is fully resolved. But they're ready to go. And I suspect, one, if not all 3 of those communities will adopt this policy as well. Other towns that have the city of Somerville, which is a fairly large city of almost 100,000, and a smaller town called Winchester also have hearings planned. So we'll see what happens ultimately, but I would not be surprised if Massachusetts is one of these states where we have the policy going from town to town to town. That's what happened with Tobacco 21. It started in Massachusetts, and one town after another started adopting it, and soon other cities and eventually states adopted that. And now that is the law of the land. Although, again, as Chris mentioned, this has to be done at the state and local level if you're ending all sales of tobacco products. But that is a path to a tobacco-free future.
Massachusetts making moves. I like it. So I want to talk to you a little bit about logistics, as you may call it. We have a lot of volunteers. We have a lot of parents. We have a lot of parent advocates and public health folks that we work with on a daily basis. For somebody who might be interested, we heard from a lot of moms who were really upset. They wanted to go after big tobacco and they wanted to do advocacy, and that's the way that they're going to protect other kids in the future from getting addicted. For those people who might be interested in getting started, how would you suggest that they do that? Who do they contact? Where do they start? How did it start in Brookline? I know that it may seem a little overwhelming to say, okay, I'm going to work on ending the sale of tobacco products in my town. One, you may not be able to. And 2, who should you be working with? Who should they reach out to?
Yeah, I mean, for parents, and one of the questions we often ask is, if you're a parent, do you want your kid to start vaping when they're 18? Do you want them to start when they're 21? No, you don't ever want them to start. And this is a policy that can actually draw a bright line so that no one born after a certain date can buy tobacco products. So, candidly, in Brookline, this was a meeting of two advocates in my office, and we sort of came up with a plan. And I think Chris at ASH is a fantastic contact. I would be happy to work with any parents to sort of let them know what the situation is in their state, whether or not there is a possibility of doing this on the local level, and helping to use proven language to craft a policy that that they can advocate for.
Yeah, we have amazing resources and partners, obviously folks like Mark and Chris representing their organizations who can help people at the local level to, first of all, see if this is even possible at the local or state level, and then take it from there. We have a great network of advocates and parents in almost all states. And so if you want to get connected with other people who are interested, reach out, and we would love to make those connections for you. These resources are available, and we hope to see more and more towns like Brookline and others in Massachusetts make moves.
And just one last thing, as Rebecca had said, this is, you need to bring all the tools to the table, and the nicotine-free generation is just one of those tools. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So there are, but it can be complementary to so many other policy proposals. So that's a consideration that people might want to keep in mind.
Definitely. I want to turn it over to Stacy now. So this summer, we probably all heard, or those of you who work in tobacco control probably heard, that Truth announced its support for a tobacco-free future in the United States. And you had the release of the report called Game Changer, Shifting from Tobacco Control to Ending the Industry's Influence for Good. I want to ask you a specific question that sort of relates to PAVe and how we work with vape products. Why did Truth decide to support a tobacco-free future, and why did you all include all nicotine products other than FDA-approved cessation products in your recommended policy? We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but a lot of folks who are doing tobacco-free policies or tobacco endgame policies have not included all nicotine products, including vape products. So can you give us a little bit of background on why Truth decided to include all nicotine products?
Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, the reason we did it is, honestly, it's been part of our, just as Chris said, it's been part of our mission and vision for quite some time, is to create a world where young people reduce or reject tobacco and nicotine use, and anyone can quit. And so, and we want to make tobacco a thing of the past. So that has long been our mission and vision. But the more I have been on Chris's Project Sunset committee for quite some time, but we hadn't taken an organizational stance until this summer, when we just sort of realized this is something we really need to do. It's inherent in our mission. I think, we don't necessarily, as an organization, work directly at the state or local level. We do a lot of work on the federal level. And, from our perspective, as Mark was saying, there are a lot of policies that, you could use to count, I guess count is the wrong word, but, to consider as endgame. And some of those are at the federal level, things like the menthol cigarette restriction, and potentially a nicotine cap and combustible products. But in terms of, why we chose to go beyond combustible products, nicotine, whether it's in an e-cigarette or a cigarette, is harmful to developing brains. So that's not going to change. As Chris said, young people people who use tobacco tend to almost exclusively get addicted when they are very young. And so that was going to continue to be a problem. We really were struck by the potential for Endgame to reduce tobacco use and tobacco related health disparities. Removing menthol from cigarettes would be a huge step in helping African Americans who have been long targeted by the tobacco industry with those products, and helping them to taking those products off the market would help that community as well as many others, but that community in particular to reduce their tobacco use. Also the industry will always try to reinvent itself, and this is where the nicotine piece comes in. They are going to hang on to their market share with all they have, and now we see them saying that trying to pose as part of the solution to the problem that they created in the first place, which is really unbelievable, even for the tobacco industry. And so we really see Endgame as a way to put an end to an industry that has targeted children and other vulnerable populations. And really all they want is to get them hooked on their products and keep them hooked. And so we've just felt like we couldn't stop with combustible products. We needed to extend that. That's not to say we don't understand that this might take some time, and we might have to do, some things focused on combustible products first, and then move to the nicotine, but not necessarily. I mean, and that definitely doesn't mean we can't put in strong policies in terms of limiting the industry's ability to market to youth, restrict flavors, which can be done at both the federal and the state and local levels, and where they're allowed to sell these products, and reducing youth access. So all of these things kind of put us on the path toward Endgame.
Yeah, I want to highlight that for folks who are not so familiar with this concept, that just as Stacey mentioned, all of these policies that we are working on, whether it's a federal level menthol ban or restricting access or these kinds of things, it all leads to the final result, which hopefully is Endgame. And so even if it's not called Endgame per se, but you're doing this kind of policy work at the local and state level, it's all helping you get there. And it's not just that you have to go in the deep end like Brookline and say, okay, we're going to end all sales. You can start with other policies first and then eventually get there. There are a few other towns in the United States that have already done tobacco sales bans, including Brookline, obviously. So Manhattan Beach and Beverly Hills, California. I know Chris is instrumental in helping all of those things go through and worked with the mayor very closely in Beverly Hills. But I do want to acknowledge, I guess you could say, the elephant in the room, that in these jurisdictions, a lot of these areas are mostly affluent, and a lot of times they're also homogeneous with their population. So I want to ask to the group, are tobacco-free policies really possible in more diverse communities? We know that the tobacco industry markets to communities of color. We've heard about this in the past panel that was happening earlier today. Is it possible to do tobacco endgame in towns and cities like this, where people have been historically targeted by the industry for years? I'll open it up to anybody who wants to answer that question.
I mean, I'm happy to start.
Why don't you start?
Mark, go.
No, after you. No, okay. I was just going to say that the threshold question is: do we care about the young people in those communities as much as we care about the young people in Beverly Hills and Manhattan Beach, right, and Brookline? Are we willing to protect them? Are we willing to, as attorneys, are we willing to defend those regulations when they're challenged in those places where there is that kind of targeting actively by the industry? And it's harder sometimes to denormalize these products.
And I just want to point out that all three of these campaigns were local and organic. They came to folks like Mark and I for help, and at least I just kind of parachuted in at the end. I didn't really make it happen in those towns. They weren't targeted by any national strategy. They just happened to be places that already had done everything else they could to control tobacco, and had decided that this is the next step, and we finally get rid of it. I also want to point out, I just give props to 3 other towns in the United States that are doing something similar, and that's Dolgeville, New York, and Bloomington and Little Canada, Minnesota. And they are basically doing a tobacco-free generation concept for retailers. And so they will never give a new retail license, and they will not allow the existing ones to be transferred, which means as people retire or move or pass away, those licenses will disappear forever, and eventually there will be no sales.
That's very interesting to hear about. We did something similar in New York City with retail reduction and not issuing new licenses. I used to work for the Department of Health in New York City, and so we worked on a lot of different policies to reduce retail licenses for tobacco, and new licenses wouldn't be reissued. So it's interesting to hear about what people are doing and whatever they can get done in their towns. I mean, you have to be creative. I think whatever there is political will for, whatever you think that can possibly get passed, go for it. Start somewhere, and then hopefully you get policymakers on your side, and they become champions for you, and then you can create more change. We only have a couple of minutes left. Oh, sorry.
Sure. I would just like to, I just think that it's really important to think about Endgame as being extreme, taking these bold measures that are going to have really big impacts. And I think, for some of the communities that you're talking about, it might be just easier to hit it with these endgame policies, rather than trying to sort of nibble around the edges with other policies, and that they haven't been able to get into place. So hopefully, taking care of this, in one fell swoop.
For all. Yep, definitely. We hope that would be the case, but of course, if that's not possible for some folks, then keep on fighting the good fight, I guess. We only have a few minutes left, but I do want to talk about this from a more global perspective. The United States is notoriously a little less aggressive, you could say, compared to some other countries around the world. New Zealand has recently passed a tobacco-free generation policy. And actually just this month, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak, has proposed a nationwide smoke-free generation policy. I know, Chris, you do a lot of global tobacco control work. Can you give us a little perspective on New Zealand and the UK? And I mean, do you think that this is even something that could be possible in the United States? I know both New Zealand and the UK do not include vaping in their legislation, though. So I just want to note that before you give your answer.
Yeah, well, obviously possible in the United States. We have Brookline as the shining example, and it's still the only one to have implemented it, even though New Zealand passed their law. Because of the birth date that they selected, it won't actually come into effect until 2026. So Brookline was first, and in our proof of concept. New Zealand is a very interesting case study for me. They were the first country to set what we now call an aspire goal. So in 2010, they decided that they were going to get to 5% or less prevalence across all communities by 2025. And 3 of the researchers at Otago University that were sort of responsible for that plan also serve on the Project Sunset Committee. And about 4 years ago, they were looking at the numbers, looking at their graphs, and realizing they're not going to make it. They're not going to get to 5% by 2025, and they'd already squeezed on everything they could, smoke-free air laws, taxation, everything. And so, to their credit, they didn't change the goalposts, which almost everyone else does, including the United States, which did have a 5% target by 2030, but also recently realized they can't make it, and so they changed the goal to 6.1. So New Zealand decided, well, we have to do something different. And so in December, they passed a law that is now the state of the art in endgame in the world. It isn't just smoke-free generation. So anyone born after 2008 will never be able to buy combustible tobacco products in New Zealand. But they also set in motion schemes to reduce nicotine in combustible cigarettes to non-addictive levels. And they're implementing a dramatic loss of lowering of the number of retail licenses by 95% in New Zealand. So only 1 in 20 retailers will survive this. And the UK, of course, is also looking at a smoke-free, and they're looking at the same date as New Zealand as well. So anyone born after 2008. They're on the e-cig issue. I want to point out they're a little bit different. The United Kingdom is alone in the world in having embraced e-cigarettes as a method of cessation to get people off of smoked tobacco products. And they did that almost right away when different countries were looking at this issue and figuring out how to do it. It's a human experiment right now going on in the UK. There are definitely problems with it. And I know they're rethinking their e-cig policy, not so much to stop what they're doing, but maybe to regulate them a little more harshly. New Zealand is not the same. They haven't embraced e-cigarettes. They've just recognized that the death is coming from smoked tobacco. So they've started there, and they're already in the midst of coming up with their scheme to restrict electronic cigarettes as well. They're just starting with the really deadly products. I want to point out too that these are not the only two countries that are doing this sort of thing. New Zealand was the first Aspire country, but now there are about 15, including the United Kingdom, around the world, and they are in various stages of putting together a plan to get them from where they are now to endgame. And even countries that are not anywhere near poised to do endgame, like Spain, which has a 22% prevalence, they also have a plan in place to get them to a point where they can implement smoke-free, tobacco-free generation, or nicotine-free generation in Spain. And it's even gotten to the point of regional governments. The European Union has set a very ambitious cancer goal by 2040, and they've realized they can't do it unless they get rid of tobacco. And so there is an official committee in the European Commission that's looking at tobacco endgame.
That is very inspiring and motivating to hear. I know that if other countries and the European Union can set a plan and a goal, I'm sure and hopeful. I'm not sure. I'm hopeful that the United States will follow suit as well. I think we're a little bit over time now, but I just really, really want to thank all three of you for joining our panel today. This topic is particularly something that I'm very passionate about, and I really appreciate you all being here and talking about it today. And thank you to everyone for listening. And hopefully we've, kind of piqued your interest in this. If you want to connect with anyone, please reach out to info@parentsagainstVaping.org, or and we will connect you with either Chris or Mark or Stacy or other parents. If you just want to chat with them and brainstorm, feel free to reach out. And before we leave, I think we want to make sure that you use the link in the chat that I think will be going. Yes, it'll be going in the chat. So go back to the main session so you can listen to our closing remarks. And thank you again for joining. Take care.